So now we're going to talk about the erosion of competitive advantage. And Oded Shankar, a professor at Ohio State, always talked about one of the main threats to competitive advantage, or one of the main threats also to innovation, is imitation. And that's one of the main things. You think about it. You get your differentiation advantage up, and someone else just copies the product that you produced and they make it better. You've lost your competitive advantage because you are no longer the best, and therefore customers will pay a price premium on that other product. But this applies also to process innovation, right? I mean, you've got consultants and process engineers going from one firm to the next, bringing those best practices with them. So just because you found some sort of a way to engineer or manufacture a product cheaper than the competitors, know that your techniques and your processes will eventually be found out and spread across the industry, and therefore you would also lose your cost advantage. So imitation is the #1 source of erosion. So you've always got to be improving, growing, and changing. The only thing in business that is not moving is something that is dead. You always have to be moving, otherwise you're getting weaker. Now there's some other things that are also likely to erode competitive advantage. Of course, we mentioned this already, it was new entrants. Okay? New entrants can, of course, erode your competitive advantage. Again, possibly because they're imitating what you're doing and they're coming up with a new idea, but it could also be something totally different. I think of the post office, right? The post office had sort of a monopoly on mail for a long time until UPS came, then FedEx, and of course new entrants from distant sectors like email and all that kind of stuff. So new entrants are definitely going to erode your competitive advantage. Technology change. Nokia is a great example of this. They had the monopoly on the smartphone. And then Apple came along and came up with a device that did music, internet, telephone, synced with all the Apple products, all that cool stuff. Technology dramatically changed and Nokia lost their advantage. And of course the post office is another good example. Email came along and wound up being a threat. So you've always got to be improving. And then of course, customers. You know, a lot of products are kind of fads or fashions, and customers' needs and behaviors may change based on that. So a customer, quite frankly, may just decide, you know, we don't like those products anymore, we'd like to have something else. And that is also eroding your competitive advantage, because then since you can no longer sell the product, you have lost your advantage. And this erosion is occurring all the time, and it occurs very, very fast. So you always have to be improving. Now, as I mentioned, imitation is probably the biggest threat to your competitive advantage. And there's some ways that you can block imitation. So the first thing that you have to do, or a competitor has to do to imitate what you're doing, is identify actually how you're producing a product, or what are its components, or how you've achieved differentiation. So if you want to prevent that, of course, in theory, you could obscure what gives you superior performance. So don't tell them how you produce the product. Don't tell them what makes the product special, or how your marketing techniques are used. Okay? There can also be an incentive to imitate. And if there's no incentive to imitate, then competitors may be less likely to take your ideas. So, of course, you could have deterrence set up. If you think that a company is going to imitate your product, then you can have lawsuits, legal action, you know, all that kind of stuff. I mean, you heard about this recently with Google that is suing Uber. Yeah, that sends a very strong signal. Of course, they're accusing them of taking their ideas. But it sends a very strong signal, don't steal Google's ideas or we'll send our legal team after you. So that may remove or dampen some of the incentives to actually imitate. Alternatively, you could preempt it. You could exploit all available investment opportunities. Think of things like, oh, this works really well with natural resources, right? You've got a firm that wants to exploit a copper mine or an oil well. Well, buy up all the oil wells and the copper wells in the area, and then people probably aren't going to be able to imitate your product. Or, of course, I think Uber is a good example of this as well. Uber is pretty much everywhere. It would be very hard for a new company to get in on that because Uber is so prevalent. Of course, it can also, with regards to imitation, a firm can try to diagnose what you're doing. And in this way, you would have to prevent that, would be to have multiple sources of competitive advantage and a unique way in which they work together. Okay? And we call this causal ambiguity. Okay? So for example, if you are a car company and you're the best at producing tires and the best at producing doors and windows and all that kind of stuff, that's multiple sources of competitive advantage, but your real secret would be how you put all those products together. So it's not about selling the steak, it's about selling the sizzle. So causal ambiguity means people cannot figure out how all the stuff fits together. Okay. And of course, I mentioned in terms of investment, and resource acquisition is also important. If you can manage to buy up all the resources or ideas that are available, again, certain things are not easily replicable. In many ways, you could argue that Walmart has a monopoly everywhere they go because they have those special large locations with those large parking lots. That's a pretty hard thing to replicate. They are able to specialize in getting locations. Starbucks has that also. In many ways, they are masters of assessing and buying real estate, possibly more than they are even buying coffee. Because of those prime locations that they have, they get the foot traffic. So they are acquiring those resources, and it's very hard to replicate a good location or a certain natural resource. Now, we talked about cost advantage and differentiation advantage in the last video, and it ties into a theme where I've talked about causation and effectuation, strategy of design, strategies of process, but you probably remember that I talked about strategy as kind of a fit. So in many ways, what you want to do is be able to kind of stretch between a degree of differentiation and a degree of cost advantage, but then there's some other things that you want to look at too. And this is what we call the competitive advantage diamond. And this is a good tool for assessing your own competitive advantage within the firm, but also for assessing the competitive advantage of your competition. So at the top you have your time-based, hopefully you can see me, your time-based competition. And your time-based competition would be things like innovation, responsiveness, and of course, preemption. But you can see me. Okay? At the bottom, you'd have unique resources and competencies. Then you have differentiation. And cost advantage. Now what you may be noticing is differentiation and cost advantage in many ways is externally defined. Cost advantage means that you charge less than the competitors. So that's something that is defined at the industry level. Differentiation means that you are significantly different than the competitors, and therefore you can charge a price premium over your competitors. Whereas time-based competition is something that's more of an internal factor to the firm, and so are unique resources and capabilities. Based on your organizational structure, your culture, your org design, you may be able to innovate, be more responsible, or preempt the competition more efficiently than others. Right? But that's based on looking inside the firm. Same thing with unique resources and competencies. You have those within a firm. Now, all firms usually have some combination of these. It's not like you have just, differentiation and cost advantage, or just time-based competition differentiation. You kind of have to stretch and fit. Of course, yes, you do have to make choices to focus on some things and not others, but you're focusing almost on some things and not others within each of these domains. And some people like to draw lines to show exactly where their firm fits in between them. But for purposes of simplicity, we'll just kind of give an example of, let's see if I can think of some. Costco, that's one of my favorite companies, right? So in terms of time-based competitive advantage, right? Costco was in many ways a first mover. They were one of the first large wholesalers that was available to the public. And in terms of innovation, so they're first mover, in terms of innovation, they're very responsive to what their customers want. And they've always got new products kind of coming and going. So that's a competitive advantage, looking inside of the firm. Now they also have a variety of unique resources and competencies. They've got great locations. Again, location is something that's very hard to replicate. Really great knowledge of real estate. They have a tremendous amount of internal growth capacity. Okay. They know how to manage their suppliers amazingly well and manage to get those great prices from their suppliers, which they can pass on to their customers. They really understand merchandising, and also they have the Kirkland signature brand that people like. In terms of differentiation, of course their products are of consistently high quality, and they have the Kirkland signature brand, which is also a way for them to differentiate their products from those of their competitors. They also enjoy a degree of cost advantage. Their goods, because of course, their global presence, but also because you buy in bulk, gives them a cost advantage over competition. They have also so many locations, and they're usually in cheap land areas. They have high sales per square foot, and they have a degree of experience. They've got the great learning curve going, so that gives them a cost advantage. So you see Costco kind of has all of them. This is the competitive advantage diamond. Great. So in our next video, we're going to go into more depth in cost advantage. I hope you found this video interesting, and I will see you next time.